All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Mason Cosby, founder of Scrappy ABM, and today we're going to be walking through a webinar playbook that actually generates revenue. So from a pipeline perspective, we were able to generate roughly 8 deals a quarter that were at an average value of $30,000. Some of them were 20, some of them were 80, just depends on the client. So again, ballpark 30 to 35 from a per deal basis. As far as how long did it take to see results, again, I ran this on a quarterly basis. So some of the opportunities would come in within a week, some of them would take 3 months. So again, it's highly dependent from a variable perspective on the content that you provide within the webinar and how immediately actionable and how much you build the pain. As it relates to specific channels, we specifically used email, we used organic social, we used LinkedIn events, which are huge from my perspective and super underutilized. We used a webinar, so we used Zoom webinars for that. And then we used our website for landing pages and pop-ups and those kinds of things. So from a channel perspective, entirely organically focused through social, email, webinar, website. As far as tactics and strategy, again, the high-level strategy of the webinar playbook is what is a specific topic that we know our target accounts are specifically struggling with. And then we did outbound sequencing, not to schedule a call, but to register for this webinar. And from there, they felt like they were just kind of being targeted based on, oh, this might be of interest. But we specifically only actually targeted our promotional channels towards our target accounts so that it was a webinar full of actually right fit customers. Yes, we did organic social, but I personally, through my social channels, have connected with all my target accounts. So my LinkedIn audience at that time was my target accounts exclusively. And then we invited them to a LinkedIn event, and I can only invite my connections to a LinkedIn event. So they were also my target accounts. So those were the high level tactics and strategies to get people there. And then we did one-to-one follow-ups. When I say one-to-one, we created dedicated landing pages with dedicated content for every single account that we went after. So we would have 160 people register, and we would send one-to-one content and emails and videos to 40 of those accounts. It took me 50 hours to do all of that in 1 week, but it was something that I did on every single quarter. That was just, I knew this was the week of my life, and I told nobody to bother me for that week. As far as how long did it take to implement, first time was a little bit tougher because we had to build out all of our templates. We had to build out the landing pages. Like I had to work through some of the operational challenges because some of the systems don't appropriately connect. But once we got it down, I actually just have an 8-page process doc, and I can build the whole thing out in a day and then just let it run for 6 weeks. And then I take a week after it's done. As far as how many people did it take to implement, I'm a scrappy marketer. So I do content, I do operations, I do strategy. But essentially the roles in this context would be content, strategy, operations, and a salesperson. So it could be one person that's just really bullish, could be 4, but those are the roles that you need in order to make this successful. As far as money, it's your tech stack. So again, Zoom, from a webinar perspective, I think it's like $200 a month. You have HubSpot. You can do this actually for free with HubSpot. So you just need the ability to build out landing pages. We hosted our videos that we sent in the outbound emails on YouTube. So the hosting there was free. And then we sent out emails. So again, you can do an outbound sequencing tool. You can do that in HubSpot. You could do that through Apollo for free, or you can just like have a spreadsheet and send an email. So again, email, website, LinkedIn is free. And that's really it from a cost perspective. So it can be $200 a month. It could be however expensive your tech stack is. And then who can implement the strategy? The thing that's really challenging with this is you need to be able to publicly provide one-to-one value based on the client. So we were doing, and we'll get more into this if you listen to the full episode, but we were providing one-to-one website reviews based on people that had submitted their website wanting a review. So we had access as a marketing agency to look at their website and do a complete website teardown because they have requested it. So you need to think through what is the publicly accessible value that I can provide that's related back to my product or service, because I don't have access to their systems. I don't have access to their technology. I don't know necessarily all their people and their personnel. So what can I do that is a webinar format that provides great value and information that I can then follow up one-to-one with even a deeper dive on their specific organization. So if you match that criteria, you can do this. If you don't, you probably can't. And I'm sorry, that's just how it is.
If that resonates with you, listen along. Also, check out our other episodes. You're listening to TLDR, the B2B SaaS growth podcast brought to you by Spear Growth. The goal of the podcast is to enable you, our listeners, to generate an additional $100,000 in cumulative pipeline by May 2024. To do this, we bring people who have made a real impact in their companies. They cut through the fluff and dive deep into one tactic or strategy of theirs. I'm your host Ishan. Let's generate pipeline. Hey Mason, thank you so much for doing this again. I know we just recorded the first episode like 5 minutes ago, but yeah, like love this. I'm being scrappy as well. So webinars usually don't work, right?
Yeah.
Let's just start there. I've seen, and I'm sure everyone has seen at least 20 companies each where, yeah, like in 21 might be like, hey, webinars work for us. And in like most companies who say that, hey, webinars work, either they're not looking at the actual costs, or um, it's just someone came to webinar or registered for it, and then we have their email, and then we're just going to bombard them with sales till they actually say yes, and it's not really the webinar doing anything. So
Yep.
getting webinars to work is not easy. It's definitely not easy. So I'm really looking forward to this one. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So perfect. This in a sentence, can you introduce yourself? What you
Yeah.
do? Yeah.
Mason Cosby, founder of Scrappy ABM. I help people build their first ABM program. Really, if you think about, everybody talks about this concept of crawl, walk, run in the ABM space. Scrappy ABM, to my knowledge, is the only service provider that's dedicated to the crawl space. So we help you get started.
Love that. Love that. Great. So, like jumping right into the webinar space. So, from what I understand, or from the intro that you gave, I think there are three major components that really make it work. One is your targeting. Second is what the webinar is about, the value you're providing. And then the third is just the follow ups. Is there any other bucket that we really need to get into or talk about apart from these two?
I would say, yeah, I mean, those are the core things of targeting, content, and then follow up. The only other thing that I would throw out is for this to be compounding in its impact, consistency. So for this webinar series, we ran the same webinar every single quarter. It was the same title. And so we created a content framework that actually made it an easier lift for our team on the actual content side, and it created this environment in which people actually enjoyed engaging. They showed up live. They got a lot of value out of it. So again, you can't just use the webinar as a mechanism to gather target accounts information and to say like, oh, they did something, we should reach out. Like, you actually have to provide legitimate value in the webinar and in the replays, because otherwise you're going to send an email and they're not even going to open it. So I would just really focus, of all the things that are the most important, it's the actual content itself, not the follow-ups. The content itself is the most critical piece to actually making a webinar successful.
Perfect. So let's still go in order. I'd want to really understand the process of the targeting that you did. What exactly, how did you pick the accounts? And say, like, just can you just walk us through that piece?
Yeah, so we were an ABM agency, and this was when I worked in a much larger agency than building Scrappy ABM. So we were focused on mid-market companies that had ABM platforms in place. So we did have a data enrichment provider that was through a partnership. We used Sales Intel at that time, and we were able to segment down to a ballpark of about 750 accounts that were our best fit potential customers based on uh, the revenue that they were seeing, based on the number of employees, based on the size of their marketing department, based on the size of their sales team, the sales leadership in place, and the technographics of that organization, and then also the specific industries that they served in. We did a lot in the professional services space, we did a little bit in the tech space, and we did a lot in manufacturing. So again, those were kind of our core industries. So that was the targeting criteria. And then what we also did is we went through and specifically focused in on accounts that were already existing within our CRM, because if they were already existing in our CRM, there's a much higher likelihood that they know that we exist. So again, we wanted to, for the first round especially, have a bit of an easier lift on that front. So we looked at the source of how they discovered us, because obviously if they're in our CRM, but they were in our CRM because they were a sales intel list upload, not super helpful. So looking at source plus the accounts, and if we can see that they were sourced through other methods, then those are the people that we specifically prioritize our outreach to in a one-to-one way for the webinar itself.
Uh, that's very interesting. So, from the people who you, or how many people would you, did you, had you planned to get on the first webinar? Because based on what you said, it just seems like a lot of work after someone gets in. So, if you by mistake invite too many people, like the process
Yeah.
might just break down, right? So, how did you plan that? Is that like, am I right? Am I wrong? Just wanted to understand. Yeah.
No, I mean we actually didn't focus too much on what's the right number of people, because when we get to the follow up section, we don't follow up with everybody. Like we wanted to get as many people in there because there's a couple of things. Yes, it was an account based program, but to be able to say we have 200 registrants, like it gives it validity, so that your target accounts are actually more likely to uh, register for the webinar itself. It's social proof. So again, from that perspective, we sent a far and wide net on actually getting people in. Again, we posted organically on social, so like anybody that has a social media account could find it. It wasn't like it wasn't gated behind a gate to register. It was, hey, anybody can show up to this. But to and this will be helpful for understanding the targeting side. What we were doing specifically in the context of the webinar that I'm referencing, it was called Fix Your Site. So it was just very clear, very simple, and we did live website teardowns. So again, people would submit their website to be reviewed, and what we did on the webinar is we actually reviewed our target accounts websites. So like people came to the event, they were not the right fit. We didn't review their website if they weren't the right fit. We didn't follow up with them one to one. We only followed up with those one to one that were the right fit. And then what we also said is submit your website. We'll review 5 live. 25 will get a one to one. Like we'll win the opportunity for a one to one follow up. Sometimes we did 40, sometimes we did 20, but like we ballparked it at like 25. So it made it feel somewhat exclusive from a framing perspective.
I actually really, and that's very interesting. So the webinar itself was almost like a live show of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very interesting. Is there anything else about targeting that you did differently? Because yeah, I think a lot of people post things, a lot of people do reach out to people. I think the reason why you got the registrants is one because you had built out, and please, I'm just saying this so that you can correct me,
Yeah.
or just add things that I've missed. So the reasons why what you are doing worked is one, you had figured out or you had built that owned media beforehand to a large extent or to some extent. And the second major reason is the offering, the webinar itself was something that you had figured out that, hey, if I do this, people will show up. You might have seen things like Peep Laja from Winter. He does a lot of website teardowns and people love that. People keep asking for things like that. A lot of other people do this. So you had an idea that was pre-validated, or maybe is what I'm assuming. So that you had figured out a really specific pain point. So those are the two major reasons. Like the content was the reason why the outreach worked. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, for the first webinar, I'll be very transparent. We got like 80 people that registered. So like the first one wasn't huge. The fifth one was 300. So like the first time we did it, I wish I could say, oh yeah, we nailed it. Like we knew exactly what we were doing. No, we were testing something. We got 8 people that showed up, and then after we did the webinar, I was like, we had 80 people submit their website for a review. Maybe we would like should like follow up with them with a website review. And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. How long do you think that's going to take? I'm like, I don't know. So like we did it. And I was like, oh, this is going to take a week. But then we knew after, well, screw it, we'll test it, see what happens. And it worked. Like we got 8 deals that came into the pipeline. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And again, from a cost per acquisition, my time for a week to get 8 deals that come through the pipeline and close
Yeah.
was a very easy customer acquisition cost analysis of like, I don't get me wrong, I'm not super cheap, especially at that time. I was much less expensive from a salaried perspective. So it was
Yeah.
literally just like a, what was my time at that point? I think it was like $2,500 a week was the ballpark, so like
Yeah.
2,500 or 3 grand a week. So again, looking at that, $30,000 in deals in 8 deals. Again, that's the customer acquisition cost. So
Yeah.
it just wasn't a complex equation on that front.
I'm just quiet because I really, it's very interesting. So the website teardown, just to be clear, the agency that you were, the place that you're working with, they did web development. Like that was the offering after that.
Yes. So it was, we're going to review your website, tear it down. Hey, by the way, if you need a website, we do website support. And we actually did a website teardown of a website that we had built at the end as a case study to show this is what a website should look like. And it was always a different website. So it was, did two or three things. One, again, created a clear entry point for us to say, like, hey, if you need help and you've seen these websites and you're making these same mistakes, these are very common mistakes, we help fix that. So it was a very clear call to action. And then it also, we provided a case study and a template and said, hey, you can go mirror this website if you would do it in house. So we gave them other solutions that weren't just us and showed them the value that we can specifically provide.
So perfect. So I'll put you a little bit on spot and ask you a few things. But so let's say a very easy way to transition this to a different service company is pretty easy. For example, I could do LinkedIn ads teardowns because I can see the LinkedIn ads. That becomes a very easy thing to replicate. Do you have any examples? And I know I usually don't do this on the podcast, but for SaaS specifically, what could is there, and you mentioned very clearly that if there isn't anything public that you can look at, then this thing does not, like this process doesn't work. So would this only work for SaaS where you got public information?
So I think it depends on what your technology does. So, like prime example, Chili Piper and Nevada did this combined thing where they went through and they used their own company email addresses and they went and opted in for like 200 demos over the course of like 2 weeks, and then they measured the delay from when they submitted a form request to when they actually got someone that reached out to them. And they also showed the number of like percentages companies that did not even reach out in the first place. And the whole purpose is with Chili Piper, you don't have to stress about a sales rep getting back to them. They can book a call immediately. And then with Nevada, it was, hey, you don't even have to request a demo. You can just like look at the demo. So from that perspective, in the context of what the company provided, it totally made sense. Like you can just look at it and look at their website, opt in for a form fill, and see what happens. And then you could do that in a live teardown type way and say, like, breaking down the customer conversion experience. The challenge you're going to run into is like, how do you do a proposal teardown? When Nadia was over at Proposify, she did proposal teardowns, but you had people that came on and gave their proposals. So like you can work through it, and like you have to do some de-anonymizing. But again, you've got to figure out like what is the thing that I specifically offer. Like I don't know how you would do I was looking at an inventory software. I don't know how you do necessarily like an inventory management software teardown. Like it doesn't work in that context. So it's very contextual to what your company actually offers, where you can tear something down in a public forum that also doesn't break an NDA, that like is very it keeps the company information private.
Hmm. No, I think that helps quite a bit. Perfect. Okay, so let's say we have the content. So the content has to be something, and like, do you have a framework for the content, or I can just maybe share what I understood the framework is? Like, how do you
Yeah.
select the content for you?
For really any webinar, I have a framework that I like to approach, which is problem. Like, what is the problem? That is the current challenge. Um, Again, from there, how do you get the most value out of the webinar? So, what we actually told everybody is if you've got two screens, pull up this webinar on one screen, pull up your website on the other, and like start taking notes of the things that you're also doing. It's like giving clear instructions on how do you actually get benefit from this webinar is not something I see a lot of people do. And again, it actually creates an environment where you're setting expectations with the audience. This is not just a put it on the in the background webinar. This is an actively involved and engaged webinar. So again, giving instructions to the audience. So here's the problem. This is why you're here. This is what we are trying to solve today. This is how you can be involved. This is how you get the most out of this. Let's dive into it. And then it's whatever your content is. So for a lot of webinars, I like, again, problem solution orientation. So like, what is the challenge? So here's the data that we have that says this is the biggest challenge that you're experiencing. Here's a step by step on how to solve that challenge. In the context of what we did for Fix Your Site, we just like literally pulled up websites and said like, we're breaking these things down. This is recorded. This is what is wrong. This is what we would do differently. So it was all problem. This is what's wrong. This is what we do differently. And like just telling people exactly what we would do. Another webinar that we did that was really successful was called Content Strategies for Rapidly Scaling Companies. Can you guess who showed up to that webinar? Rapidly scaling companies. That's who we wanted. So we literally said the challenge is for your content engine is you're scaling too quickly. You don't have enough time to actually create all the content that you need to support all the different channels. Here is a way that you can build a content strategy that is a hub and spoke model where you have a central hub that then repurposes all your content. So instead of having to recreate the wheel every single time you go to make a new piece of content, you have a central location that creates all new original thought leadership and content that then gets disseminated through a variety of channels and a variety of mediums. And they're like, this is amazing. And like, we were like, by the way, we do this for you. If you just don't like want to think about it, we'll build the program, the model for you. So like in that context, problem solution, how do you actually do it? And then right before you really like hit home with, I recommend ending with like a true case study of like, this is how we've done it. This is what success truly looks like. When you've gone through the process, you have a clear call to action that says, hey, if you're really suffering with this problem and it really hurts you, we help with this. Here's how. And then you show a case study, and then you end with a 15-minute Q&A. And like that is the structure of every webinar that I've ever done, and it is always driving revenue.
I love that. So this is more like a workshop that's also very entertaining and valuable at the same time. So I think those are so it's engaging, entertaining, and valuable is what I took away from that. So you have to have those three elements. And also you are showcasing and you are sort of showing that, hey, we know this really well. And you're making people, and I got this from a sales coach of mine that he said, hey, like, don't tell people what their problems are, ask them questions that'll make them realize that, hey, I have this problem, and you're doing that at scale, which is amazing. So
Thanks.
wow, love that. I'm just thinking through what you said. Perfect. So coming back to, I guess we have the topic. Is there anything else on how you would select the topic? I think this is what is there, what is publicly showable, what falls under all these criterias. And then you also have to, I guess, figure out the follow up. That
Yeah.
So you said you had done a lot of work beforehand, right? So the landing pages had been built beforehand, a lot of things had been done, but you don't know who's going to show up. So how did you, like, did you just do it for everyone, and then let's say 40% of them showed up, you send it to everyone even though they didn't show up?
No, it's a great question. So what we did is um there's two sides to this. So one, the upfront of like setting up all of our templates, it was like landing page. Because we did this on a quarterly basis, we actually largely recycled the same email content and like nuanced it slightly. So the first time it was like, what's the content, what's the framework, what's the cadence, what's all that. Once that was built, you can just clone everything. Literally, like you can all associate it to a HubSpot campaign. You can clone the campaign and just do it again. Like that was the easy part. From there, what I would do, because it just kind of depended on what my actual workload looked like at that point. Sometimes, because we did this 6 times over the course of a year and a half, so like sometimes I would literally say I'm going to block off the week after the webinar, and I would do everything in that week. And again, what I did was I used SEMrush for a technical audit, and then I would review the homepage. And I just did a screen share, and I just tore down their website homepage, gave them actual recommendations, and then I provided a review of the technical side of their website. And then I had two CTAs, the website self audit kit that was a deeper dive on auditing the website themselves based on the information I provided, or schedule a call. And that template from a landing page perspective, the only thing I ended up having to do was I changed an intro video, and I actually screenshotted myself waving on camera. I just changed the like, hey, whoever it was. I write a short blurb where I change a couple of people's names. Content was all largely the same. And I change out the videos. So again, depending on the workload, I might do that literally, and I might just block off the whole week. And I just sit in my office and I just record for 40 hours. And the last ones were a little bit dragging, if I'm being honest, but it's done. And we just told everybody, hey, after the webinar, we're going to select a handful that we're going to do a deeper dive with. If you are selected in that, you will get a deep dive audit on your own website within the next 2 weeks. So just keep an eye out on your inbox from, and it was our salesperson's name. So keep an eye out on your inbox to get an email from X person if you were selected. So that's just how we did it. On the other times where I didn't have as much of a workload, I would look at the websites that had already come in and look at specifically our target accounts, and I would pre-record before the webinar had happened so I could have a quicker turnaround time once the webinar was done. Yeah, and just say like, hey, you submitted your website for a review. So I never said like, thanks for attending the webinar. I just said like, you submitted your website for a review for Fix Your Site. I hope you enjoyed watching the content. So it's like very, I didn't say like watched it live or watched the record. Like, I hope you enjoyed watching the content and you got some value out of it. We're going to do a deep dive on your website. So again, you just kind of get your scripts down so that it makes sense contextually, regardless of if they attended live or not.
That's perfect. So one thing that's I guess a little bit unfair is most people don't have a mason in their team, right? So because you can wear a lot of hats, right? You are very good at speaking. So holding or hosting the webinar is something that you could do on your own. You could do the reviews and the breakdowns. Uh, Also, you could do the sequences and all of that. So if you had to break down all the hats that you were doing in different pieces, like then what are all the people that would actually be required?
Yeah, and I'll just throw this out there because it's kind of you to say like, oh, not everybody has a mason, but like just to put it bluntly, I used to suck at all of this, and I got better at it because I did it. So like anything worth doing is worth sucking at for a little bit, and that's okay. Like my
Still,
first
like if you
webinar was
still if
horrible.
I completely get that, but still, like if you had to break down all the people that would be needed, let's say, uh, I think a more common scenario would be someone like, again, because I'm trying to think
Yeah,
through all sizes of companies. Let's say someone who's in very senior leadership is taking the webinar because the title
absolutely.
draws people
So
in. Yeah.
the breakdown at that point would be essentially what I would refer to as the host. So you've got the person that's actually hosting the webinar and doing the content. And ideally, the person is also doing the breakdowns is on the webinar, that they're a familiar face. Like in the context of the webinar, I actually didn't break down any websites. I was the host and I was just the familiar face, and I like showcased the expertise of the whole team. So we actually had like 5 people on the webinar that all did a different website breakdown. So it wasn't just like the Mason show at that point. It was like, this is the agency. These are the team members. These are people you have the opportunity to work with should you move forward with us. Because even in the context of a lot of agencies, like you know one person, you get handed off somebody you don't know. We were trying to make sure that that wasn't the case. So from that perspective, you need a host, you need people that can actually create the content in the webinar. And again, from the back end side, once it's done, you need someone that can create all these breakdowns from a recording perspective. You need somebody that knows the operations of how do we actually take the video and get that on a landing page and then distribute it to the right people. And then you need somebody that can actually do the sending. So again, it's typically going to be your sales team that actually owns the account relationship. So those are host, content creators in webinar, post-event content creator, operations, and distribution.
Perfect. That helps quite a bit. And then finally, let's say I guess post webinar, what happens? Let's say 100 people joined, 40 of them or 20 of them are people you really want to work with and close.
Yeah.
What let's say there were 40 who you had invited and had said that yes, we will attend. Half of them actually came through. So that's 40 in your ICP, 20 registered, 20 attended. But the total attendance of the webinar, let's say, is 100. So there are 80 people who are on the platform who you don't want to close, but there are 20 from the 40 that had registered. So now with these numbers, like what does, like, can you just walk us through the numbers across the funnel? And
Yeah. Again, in the context of this webinar, I actually care significantly less about if they even attend. Like I'm there to create the content and then have the follow-up opportunity. So for me, we'd send a follow up to all 40 people. And in this context, we would expect that a ballpark of 20% would actually convert into pipeline. Because again, if you think about from their context, the webinar is called Fix Your Site. Like, it's not like give your site a nice little facelift. It's like your website is broken. We will help you fix it. So if they're registering for that webinar, there's a higher likelihood that they're actually interested in buying a website uh, product. The other component to that is we actually didn't ask, it wasn't a required field to submit your website. So we only went after target accounts that actually submitted their website that they wanted a review. So we got express permission to review their website. So again, ballpark 40 do that. I feel very comfortable and confident saying 20% of them will actually at least have a conversation. 80%, yeah, that's fine. They'll actually, this was actually the most interesting component. People took the advice, they made the changes themselves, and their websites improved. And like, that's awesome. They ended up becoming a referral source. They ended up becoming advocates for the agency. So I didn't care that 80% didn't convert. I just needed my metrics to make sense to actually invest the time. But it actually became a much longer term brand play within our target accounts. Because the other thing is in B2B, the industry is small. So like if you can build a great reputation and actually provide significant value to a very select group of people, that reputation will take you much further. So that's the first piece. The second piece, those other 80 that attended on the webinar, however many people attended live, you build partnerships and you say, hey, you know, super glad you got a ton of value out of that. We actually aren't the right fit to build your website, but I've got this great partner that would be a perfect fit to build the website that you're looking for. And you just become a referral source and you actually get kickbacks on that. Or surprise, surprise, people you weren't targeting are a good fit. And they're the unknown best fit customers that you didn't have in your targeting criteria. And great, you get more customers. So like that's why I actually love the um, publicly accessible ABM. You're very intentional with who you're creating the content for, but it also creates an opportunity for inbound versus a lot of ABM programs in which you actually don't create the opportunity for any inbound because it's only in privately accessible channels. Whereas this was very public. So anybody could register, and if it was the right fit, they would actually opt in themselves, which is great.
Love that last bit. Is there anything else that I should have asked but I didn't?
The only other thing would be specifically LinkedIn events, because I think this is the game changer. For LinkedIn events, essentially, what you can do is you can create an event on LinkedIn in which you can actually invite all of your accounts and all of your connections. So again, if you're connecting with all your target accounts, you can invite them. Any person on your team can invite up to 1,000 people a week. So if you have a larger network, you can. That's how you easily get like 2,000 people to register for a webinar. The other thing is you can have a registration form on LinkedIn, and they can't click yes until they actually submit for the registration form, but it populates with all the information that they already have in LinkedIn. So they don't have to fill out anything. It's just like to register yes, click yes on this form, and they click yes. The only challenge with that is a lot of it is personal emails because it was built on a LinkedIn account. But if you've got data enrichment on your back end, you can use those personal email addresses to get the data enrichment to get the professional emails. So again, I love the LinkedIn event because it's, from my perspective, one of the easiest and most effective ways to actually convert your LinkedIn audience into an email audience, which is one of the most difficult challenges around social. Of how do I actually convert my audience in a way that is meaningful and makes sense? So contextually, this makes sense. Then you just have to download that list and upload it into HubSpot. And there's a little bit of a delay there. You may be able to use Zapier. I have not at this point. I have people have talked about that, so you can automate that process. But you download the CSV, you upload it to HubSpot,
Mhm.
you opt them into your workflow, and then they get the emails from there on out. And you should do that on a weekly
Perfect.
basis.
And on LinkedIn, also the people you invite would be in your ICP.
If you're connecting with the right people through your connection strategy, then yes, they should be ICP fits. I used to connect with friends from college. Turns out none of my friends from college want to buy account-based marketing programs. So I now primarily connect with VPs of marketing.
That makes sense. Perfect. So I think the last question for the day, if you had to pitch Scrappy ABM to anyone, can you give us a quick elevator pitch of what you do and how people can connect with you?
Yeah, so the main value proposition is account-based programs for revenue teams without a 200K tech stack. So we are very focused on how do we build a repeatable framework process that actually generates tangible revenue for your business so that you can effectively build the foundational ABM program that then allows you to scale it up. So if you are looking for a guide that will walk you through step by step, how do I build a program like this? Because I make it sound simple, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not overly complicated, but there's a lot of little details and nuances that make it difficult. So, because this very easily could have been a webinar, I could have sent out 40 emails with like a week of my time that delivered nothing. And if that happens, this is a totally different story. This is a complete bomb, but it became an actual predictable revenue engine for the business. And it was just like time in, dollars out, not money in, money out. It's like we invest this time, we get these dollars, and we know it, and it's going to happen. So we help build those engines for businesses without the massive tech stack.
Love that. So if you don't have a Mason in your team, now you can.
And
love that.
one final thing, it's more than just Mason. There are team members on our side. Here's what I actually love. We are different from a lot of agencies in the context that what I've seen from other agencies is they have a great founder that's like super smart, and you get passed off to a junior team member. The people I have hired are way smarter than me, and they're helping me up level myself. So like, I'm just really pumped about the team that we have. So if you think I had good ideas, work with our team and you'll think I'm an idiot.
Love that. Thank you so much, Mason, for doing this again.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the TLDR podcast. In case you're wondering, Spear Growth is a marketing agency. We help B2B SaaS companies like yourself with ads and SEO. Check out our website at speargrowth.com. That is SPEARGROWTH.com. Just like this, every episode starts with a 1-minute summary of what we discuss. Pick the next episode to listen to based on what you can implement right away. And after you implement any of these tactics and see an impact, we'd appreciate you drop us a note on podcast@speargrowth.com.